Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
Parashat Metzora, as you can kind of probably guess from the name, we are still talking about tzara'at, once again, usually translated as leprosy, most conveniently so, but as we are going to see in the verses that we are going to get into this morning, there's something slightly different than your standard issue leprosy going on. The choices, by the way, either this is really just a choice that's too wonderful to possibly find a way to navigate. We could either have found ways to keep talking about leprosy or various discharges from genitals this morning. So it was a really tough call to try to figure out what to discuss. Rabbi Schatz was really pushing for the latter, but I guided us to the former. So,
yes, the discharge from the genitals is definitely what I want to talk about this morning.
Well, you can't always get what you want. Okay, so we are having a great morning, and we are just going to sort of pick up at the beginning of the Parsha.
A very good place to start.
Yeah, and we're not going to get into too much. It's a long chapter talking about essentially what a person should do if and when they have tzara'at, when they are found to be leprous. So we start off first with a person, right? This is the ritual for that leper. As we were discussing last week, it sort of runs through the Kohen. It doesn't run through like a medical doctor, as we were exploring in depth last week. It goes through the Kohen. The Kohen sees, right? This is now how he comes back into the camp. So once he is healed, there is a sacrifice that is offered. This is very much in the spirit of Leviticus writ large. It gets a little bloody. He has to wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe in water. So like sort of a full stripping down of what has been to finish that off. And then after that has been done, he takes that offering, he makes it. The priest is involved. And then I think we talked about the blood did we talk about the blood last year? I feel like we talked about this, right? The blood on the ear. Elon.
Oh, yeah, I think we did. I think you're right.
Blood on the ear. Sorry to disappoint everyone. I don't think we're talking about blood on the ear, but there's this very involved ritual, essentially, in order for this person to be able to re-enter the camp. We're not going to get too much into that. I'll just briefly flag verse 21 is interesting, just in terms of recognizing that not everyone has the same means. That if a person is less well off, if a person is poor, and he's not able to, quote unquote, afford what the standard sacrifice is, then there's another way of navigating that. So I thought it was interesting that, there's a recognition that not everyone has the same sacrificial bank account, as it were. So that's just sort of an interesting sub note. And after that's done, he's able to go back into the camp. Rabbi Schatz, anything you want to specifically call out here, or is that sufficient?
No, I think it's sufficient for this very thrilling Parsha.
Great. So we're now going to get into more of the bit that we're going to talk about today, which is your leprous house. Hopefully none of you have. So I'm sort of picking up this more in-depth piece starting in verse 34 of chapter 14. When you enter Canaan, that God gives it to us as a possession, and I inflict an eruptive plague upon a house in the land that you possess, which sounds pretty gnarly. The owner of the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, something like a plague has appeared upon my house. So again, you see the role of the priest in sort of assessing what's going on here. The priest shall order the house cleared before the priest enters to examine the plagues, that nothing in the house may become unclean. And after that, the priest shall enter to examine the house. So we all are familiar with quarantine protocols, so this should make sense to us. And so then getting back into, just like with a person, in terms of getting a sense of what's going on, so too with the dwelling place. If when he examines the plague, it is greenish or reddish that goes deep into the wall, then the priest says, leprous house, and closes it up for 7 days. After a week, priest comes back. And if he sees that the plague has spread in the walls of the house, the priest shall order the stones with the plague in them to be pulled out and cast outside the city in an unclean place. So sort of like dealing with Sara'at House 2.0, right? Like if it wasn't initially enough to just sort of like seal it off, now you get in there, you take the stones out, you scrape the house all around, you scrape off the coating, and you get rid of much of that Sara'at as possible. You replace the stones. I
just realized that this is a great way of connecting to Pesach. Maybe this is what I'll talk about tomorrow at Beitenu. It's a great connector piece to how we clean our houses for Pesach and what are we actually getting rid of.
Or you could talk about it right now in the Parasha.
No, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So that's kind of we've done phase 1 of leprous house, we've done phase 2 of leprous house, and we're going to be diving into third time's the charm, phase 3 of leprous house. So the verses that we are looking more closely at, Leviticus chapter 14, verses 43, 44, 45. So this is round 3. Ve'im yashuv hanega. If the blemish, right, in this case, we're not talking about a physical blemish on a person, we're talking about the blemish on the house, im yashuv hanega, ufarach babayit, and it has spread out around the house. Achar chilet et habnim. After the stones have been pulled out, the acharei hiktsot et habayit, the acharei hitoach. After the stones have been pulled out, after the house has been scraped and replastered, Uva HaKohen, the Kohen, the sort of protagonist in our story, comes on back. Vera'ah, and checks it out. Vehine pasa hanega babayit. And behold, if the blemish, the translated here as plague, has spread in the house, Tsarat mam eret hi. It is translated here as, we'll just go with malignant eruption, which, great name for Iranian, malignant eruptions. If it is a malignant eruption, it is now considered to be Sara'at mam eret. Also recognize that we can think about how we might translate that. Babayit tamehu. So therefore the house is considered to be tameh, however you want to translate, impure, unclean, unfit, etc. Venatat et habayit, and then you actually need to tear the house down. Et avanav, ve'et etzav, its stones and its timber, ve'et kol afar habayit, and all of the, translated here as coating of the house, and the word is used higher up, and it can mean plaster, but like afar also means like dust. So it has this connotation of like everything of the house needs to be torn down. Vehotzi el michutz la'ir, needs to be taken out of the city. El makom tameh, to like an unclean or an impure and unfit place, right? You gotta get everything out in order to make sure that you're handling what needs to be handled. So two sort of quick framing thoughts on this. One of which is, like, I don't know, Rabbi Schatz, what you found in terms of mafarshim. I have a lot of like big conceptual thoughts on this. I don't have a ton of mafarshim, but I think there's some interesting stuff here. You have a lot of mafarshim. You always have a lot of mafarshim.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't much to choose from, so.
Well, you did want to talk about discharges, but here we are.
Yes, that was right.
I think it's interesting that this section starts off with ve'im yashuv, right? This verb of return. It also makes me think about in the practice of tshuva, right? When you have missed the mark,
yeah,
and you go to someone, and if you apologize wholeheartedly, earnestly, with intention 3 times, and they still don't accept your apology, you have discharged your obligation to continue to apologize to that person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, I think that's implicit, right? Like I don't think, but it's what came to mind to me, because this is also the 3rd time, and it's a 3rd time, and it's a full reset, right? It's like, if you haven't gotten rid of it twice, the 3rd time, like this is sort of it. So I thought that was interesting. Rabbi Schatz, were you looking at the Talmud piece that connects this with Ben Sorer and Moreh? Did you see that?
I did not, actually.
So this might shift the conversation in a slightly direction. In the Talmud, the rabbis say, this never happened.
Wait, the plague never happened, or Ben Sorer and Moreh?
they connect. So in later on in the Torah, I'll hop out of the screen share for a second. Later on in the Torah, there's this idea of the rebellious son who's supposed to be put to death, right? Which for some of us on the call would not have been a great policy during our adolescence. So there's this idea of how the rebellious son is supposed to actually be put to death. And the rabbis, of course, narrow that to the point that in the Talmud, they talk about how the rebellious son, actually that never even happened. It's so unlikely, but the Torah actually meant, quote unquote, that never even happened. And connected to that piece in the Talmud are a couple of other examples for something that, quote unquote, never happened. And this idea of a leper's house is considered to be one of them, which is just an interesting framework to think about. On the one hand, because I don't know about you guys, I've seen mold. I've never seen leprosy in a house, but also in terms of thinking about okay, one, if it never happened, why is it in there? Or two, right, and the rabbis talk about this, it's in there to sort of learn it for its own merit and to try to understand it. But I do think that there's something interesting to think about, going back to the first thing I said, in terms of how do you know when you need to start over? At what point, how deep do you need to go to address something? I think there's interesting pieces there. That's what I got. And the White Sox are still nothing.
Okay. Rabbi Shapiro and the White Sox gives me anxiety, so we're not going to actually talk about the White Sox. But I appreciate that
it's not playoff time yet, so I'm calmer. That was just the playoffs.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Any kushiot, any good textual questions on these three verses? Yes, Tybal.
It's not a kushiot, but I can't resist because, I think your voice is so extraordinary that the reason why the rabbis decided the rebellious son would never happen is because the mother and father have to speak in a single voice, even the same pitch and tone, which clearly isn't possible if one is male and one is female because they're the parents. It's just a voice thing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that is a really beautiful, I'm glad that Metzora and Mored didn't happen, period, but that is a really nice reason to imagine that it could not have happened. Mike and then Renee.
Yeah, I don't know whether it means that it's, whether it never happened, but the point is, I guess, I think I was reading something that Rabbi Sachs wrote about this Parsha, and he talked about how sort of destabilizing, I guess, the whole concept of Lashon Hara is to a community. And so the idea that if there was any sort of sense of it, I think he used shame and guilt. So this is what I would ask my kushiot is, does this sort of have to do with the effect of Tsara on the community and how that can affect things?
Great. It's a great question, and definitely one that when we're talking about Lashon Hara gets fleshed out even more as maybe the metaphor for Tzara. Sorry, that came out of nowhere. Renee.
I'm just curious. They're talking about it's the plague, but they're not really mentioning what plague, right? Do we know what plague?
Tzara is the plague.
The what?
Tzara is the plague.
Oh, okay. That was already specified?
That's just what they call it. Instead of calling it a disease, they call it a plague.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. But it is interesting. I think that's what actually made me think of Passover first, was the idea that, when we talk about the plague of blood and how it made all the water for the Egyptians into blood, but not for the Hebrews. And then Svardea, right? The frogs were only in the Egyptians' homes, but they were really in the homes, not just kind of on the floor. Right? That's kind of what this made me think of. So maybe you'll hear more about this at Beitenu, because I think I have a thing going. Okay. Any other kushiot? All right. And also everyone should come to Beitenu because Elon Spar is reading Haftorah, and it's been a long time and we're very excited. So yes, Tybal.
Sorry for the slow old person processing delay, but When did the rabbis decide that to change one's luck, one needed to change one's physical geography?
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
What made me think about that is I was off on this thing a little bit. Rabbi Shapiro said mold, and I was thinking about that, blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking that house could be a symbol in rabbinic interpretation for just where you are.
Sure.
And that might have led to, but I didn't know when the rabbis came up with how to change your mazel is just to move your physical being.
Yeah, great. So the phrase that Ty was referring to is Mishanem Mazal, Mishanem Makom. And speaking of Beitenu, that was actually the tagline for Beitenu during COVID that Rabbi Warshawski used.
Mishanem Makom, Mishanem Mazal, I think.
Isn't that what I said?
No, you did the other way.
Oh, sorry. At least all the words were there.
Maybe because if you switch the phrase, the same thing happens.
Yeah, maybe. Very good. But it is a very interesting, an interesting way of thinking about Sarat, because if you just moved to a different home, did it move with you? Right? Was it because of you that your house was then infected with this plague? Or was it really the house now that it had kind of become outside of you, to infect the home? This is not a comparison I've ever heard before, but when you buy a home, which I've never done, but I have a grandfather and a father who worked in real estate. I know that you have one of the things that you end up having to claim, or if you're the person buying the home, that you have to ask about is if someone has died in the home, right? That literally affects the value of the home. And it's interesting because
it's actually it's in LA. I don't know about LA or California, whatever it is, but it's the people selling it are legally obligated to report it. It's not even that you have to.
That's what I said.
Okay.
What did you think I said?
I thought you said you have to ask, and I'm saying you don't even have to ask.
Sorry. Yes, right. It has to be reported, and then the people who are selling the home have to report it. But it's an interesting way of also thinking about this Sarat piece, because is it that the home is really the thing that is now taking that on and not the person? And what does that do to the person, right? Is the person just kind of absolved of whatever caused the Sarat to come to their home to begin with? So it's an interesting way of thinking about it. Rabbi Shapiro, do you want to add any texts, or do you want me to add a commentary? How do you want to?
I always defer to you, Rabbi Schatz.
Okay, great. That's lovely. So let me just get my source sheet. Give me 1 second. My Safaria has been abnormally slow lately, so just give me an extra second to open this here. So one of the things that I was particularly interested in, similar to last week actually, was this idea that, if you're living in a home and it has contracted Sarat, it's pretty obvious, but yet the Kohen still needs to come in. And so I have here, I'm going to share my screen. Oh, that is so weird. It didn't copy. Okay, well, I'll start with a different commentary then. I am still very interested in that, and while Rabbi Shapiro shares something else, I will go searching for that. I'm not sure why I didn't copy, but here is a different commentary on the Ve'im Yashuv piece here, and this is Rashi. One of the, as I think Rabbi Shapiro mentioned before, one of the very interesting aspects of this is that it can return. And so if it returns and then it breaks out into the house, what does that mean? Is it breaking out in the same place? Is it breaking out in different places, etc.? So here is Rashi's statement. So you could think that if it comes back on the same day, that the house will be unclean. Interesting that it says the house and not the person, right? If the Sarah comes back, that the person wouldn't necessarily be unclean. I guess maybe that's implied. Sorry, let me just move you all. Okay, so in verse 44, it says Vishava Kohen, and the Kohen returned, and then it says, but in our verse, Ve'im Yashuv, and if the plague returns. So interesting that what they're saying with the Vishav HaKohen is that there's the return of the priest, but then there's also the return of the plague, which is, there's a lot of returning happening here, but it seems as though if the plague returns, then the priest returns. Mashiva ha'amur lehala lesof shavua, af shiva ha'amura kam besof shavua. So, what does it mean? What's this case of return, that we're talking about in that location? It's the end of a week, right? So if a week has passed and it comes back, and then it goes on to say that this is the same as returning, when in a part of Midrash, when we're talking about, returning at the end of a week. So, the thing for me that caught my eye of this Ve'im Yashuv is that there is the potential for it to happen again. It's not just, one and done, right? It's similar to how people are somewhat thinking about COVID. Like, I had COVID, so I can't get COVID again. Well, you can, and people do, and it will happen, and it affects your whole home. But that sara'at could be something that you could contract, and then you could get it again. It doesn't go away. My kushia on that would be, what do you have to do for it to come back? Right? Do you have to speak more Lashon Hara? Is the Lashon Hara that you spoke before enough to contract it over and over again? So that's my kushia on this that I don't have an answer for. But Mike.
Well, was there some feeling among the sages back then that somehow what people said in the past could just be spread? I mean, in other words, just like if a person dies, you have to report it. You're required to report it. But I mean that somehow it contaminated the whole space, and therefore the priest had to return and make this assessment. Is that just part of what was believed at the time, that we have to just accept that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're going to continue to make the COVID connections, right, this would be like testing to leave, right? Testing to leave quarantine. Right. This idea of, except for the test is the Kohen coming to your home. So I guess I don't really know, because it seems to me that the question here is, how does it return? Why does it return? And then what's the protocol once it returns? Like, do you know enough once it's happened the first time to not need as much, protocol for when it returns the second time?
Well, if using your COVID comparison, in other words, like if Pat and I are here, and then we're going to visit somebody in the family, like we're doing next week, we're talking about, especially if the person is immunocompromised or something, that we should test preemptively to make sure that we're not going to expose that person.
Sure. Yeah. Ilan.
If I were living at the time, first of all, let me say that in the Torah, the greatest nudge seems to be the priest. So just the threat of the priest showing up at my house would change my behavior. It's like, I do not want this guy showing up in my house. He's a major nudge. So that I think that in itself acts as a preventative.
Yeah. That's very funny.
What?
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think the COVID comparison is good as far as it goes. I mean, it's the most obvious one because, well, when you think about disease today, you think about COVID.
Or chickenpox. I mean, chickenpox is another example you could use. Just something that's like easily contractable.
Right, but again, and this is where my head goes on this, I don't see tzara'at as a this is how I read it, right? But when I see tzara'at in the Torah, it seems to be indicating something to me that's not just about a physical thing that's happening, right? Like Mike was referencing that as well, right? Often understood by the rabbis under Lashon Hara, something like that. And what, I mean, I brought up the tshuva comparison, like that sort of cross rabbinic, link in my head with the tshuva piece. What it makes me think in reading about this is sometimes when there's something that's impacting my behavior, I'm able to sort of pinpoint it quickly and address it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when there's something going on, I need to go a little bit deeper and swap some stuff out, and then I can address it. And sometimes you gotta tear the whole thing down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that as a construct for me in terms of, contrary to how I spend a lot of my time, still not an epidemiologist, right? So I don't know how well that parallel does or doesn't hold in terms of infectious disease, although the concept of, being careful if things seem to be more severe, of course, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But on more of that sort of behavioral level of trying to discern how deep you have to go to uproot a pattern of behavior, that definitely makes intuitive sense to me, right? Like if Tzara'at is indicative of, we can go with like the Lashon Hara comparison. Okay, well, I'm doing that. I shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
Sometimes that's good enough, but oftentimes it's not, right? Usually there's a deeper something that needs to happen. And I kind of, actually, I'm with you as well, Rabbi Schatz. I have never thought particularly deeply about the language of it, but it's actually pretty evocative. Like it's in the midst of some very technical, sacrificial, and biological stuff, but because I think of like the physicality of thinking about the stones and the planks and the plaster, right? Like I can actually kind of envision what that, similar to pre-Passover cleaning, like you're saying, it entails, like really getting into the mix in terms of, okay, how deep do I have to go to address what's going on here? I think is an
and also to not give too much away if I do talk about this tomorrow, but
you could just talk about it now since we're doing a Parsha class.
Well, one of the things I'm thinking about, I know, thanks for bringing this Torah because now I'm thinking about it. One of the things that I think is actually so connected is that chametz, for some people, feels like such a scary thing to have to deal with right before Passover and during Passover, right? People throw away very good food because they're worried about having an open bag of bread in their home, right? If we just think for an extra second about what you could do with that open bag of bread that wouldn't be wasteful, you could give it to someone who's hungry. You could put it in a freezer that you're selling, right? There's many different ways of having perfectly good food in your home. And yet, present company included, I try to get through everything that's open before Passover starts because it just makes me feel better.
We're doing the same. We're doing the same thing.
Yeah, so you eat like
schnitzel this week in our house.
Right, you eat the most random things for
totally random stuff.
So what I was going to get at with it in terms of Tzara'at is that we don't actually know that Tzara'at was deadly or really that gross. I mean, sounds like there were lots of oozing things, so maybe it was gross, but really that terrible. But we do know that it affected a person in such a way that they really had to think about their entire surroundings. And they had to figure out how to clean their house and hopefully also how to clean out their personality, right? How to deal with that Lashon Hara piece. So I don't know. I think
that's the debut album from the Malignant Eruptions, Cleaning Out Your Personality.
Cleaning Out Your Personality. That's the number one. That's the what's it called? An album.
That's their lead single.
That's the lead single. Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. I'll be here all week. You won't be, but I will be. Anyway, so that's where I'm going with that in my brain right now.
Do you want to see that Talmud piece that talks about the things that have never existed?
Sure.
Well, I don't have to.
Does it talk about, is Sarah one of those things?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna flip through the Talmud at random.
Yes, please show us or tell us.
All right, sure. So it's in Sanhedrin 71a, and this is where it's sort of like what Tybal was saying, right, in terms of talking about, well, this stubborn and rebellious son, what actually is that, right? If we're going to have something that the penalty is so severe for what this kid did, what is it? And gets into like this real narrowing of what it actually is, to the point where it's like that can't, it's basically legislating something out of existence, essentially, right? And it is, for me, by the way, one of the core examples and favorite things to talk about, as Rabbi Schatz knows, in terms of how we're rabbinic Jews, not Torah Jews, right? If we were Torah Jews, we would just find stubborn and rebellious sons and we kill them. That's obviously not what we do, right? Because we are Jews through the lens of the normative understanding of the rabbis, and this basically gets legislated out of existence, essentially. Like it's like this isn't a thing, right? We understand the core teaching to it, but we're going to say, you know what? We're gonna find a way to understand this so that we can have it as a part of our larger textual tapestry, but it's not something that's going to be like implemented all the time, if ever. And so this sugya talks about, right, and so Tybal, right, here's what you're saying. If his mother was not identical to his father in voice, appearance, and height, he does not become a stubborn and rebellious son, right, sort of rooted in, right, this midrashic understanding. He will not obey our voices, right, and voices can only be plural if, like, the voices are the same. Sure, rabbis, okay, right, so then this opinion, there has never been a ben sorer u'morav. There's never been a stubborn and rebellious son. And then from there, the rabbis go on to list a couple of other examples of something that, quote unquote, has never happened before, like an idolatrous city, right? An idolatrous city is also something that needs to be, interestingly enough, completely razed to the ground, right? And have all of its inhabitants killed, which also, understandably, something that our rabbis might be uncomfortable with. And so this idea that, oh no, that's actually not a thing that has ever existed. And interestingly here, it's sort of an echo of Abraham, right? Abraham negotiating with God about, even for the sake of the 50, will you let the cities, even for the sake of 40, 30, 10? And according to the rabbis, a city that has even one mezuzah can't be an idolatrous city, which is very interesting. I don't know if that gets paskined out that way, but that's what it says in the Talmud, and Rabbi Schatz's day is now made because I said paskind.
I think of if I've heard of it. Halachic, yeah. I don't think I have.
I defer to our expert halachist, Rabbi Schatz. But so, and here's the third one, right? According to an old rabbinic text at Breitza, there has never been a house afflicted with leprosy of the house, and there will never be one in the future. So it's these examples of things that, one, seem to frankly be sort of somewhat unlikely in terms of how they're constructed, and also seem to be things that the rabbis like have a tough time with, right? So it's interesting to me that this idea of the leprous house sort of gets lumped into the category with those two other things. So I think that's interesting. I think we could drash that out a couple of different ways, but I'll just sort of offer it up and see where we go from there. Yes, Tybal.
On the mezuzah, and I didn't remember that part, did they then go off and say, and even if the mezuzah is not properly hung, and even if the scroll's not kosher, and even this and even that, so basically they're saying if someone even thinks about having a mezuzah, that counts.
Yeah, like I said, I defer to our expert halachist, Rabbi.
When it comes to ben sorer and moreh, we basically give the benefit of the doubt. So my assumption, I don't know that mezuzah text specifically, but my assumption would be that yes, as long as there's some suffix, there's some doubt around having a mezuzah at all, or getting to a place where you would hang a mezuzah at all, that would be considered okay. But I don't know that for a fact. I don't know the text well enough around that particular sugya. Mike.
What about the idea about perhaps that we're not, just like the Pesach story doesn't include the whole, it has different pasuks, but then it doesn't make the connection all the time with, like, God will lead you with an outstretched arm, but it doesn't completely make the connection, and will take you to the land of milk and honey. That it's not all there. To reflect the idea that there are some things that we are not redeemed, that the process is something that has to continue, that we are never quite redeemed. There's always something that we need to do to make ourselves, to reset ourselves, to...
Yeah, I think you might have muted. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know where I put myself on mute by accident.
No, it's okay.
Yeah,
People try to mute me all the time. So
I know. I mean, yeah, it could have been Rabbi Shapiro that was muting me.
That's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, or Rabbi Schatz.
It was definitely not me. I was listening very intently.
Yeah. Okay. So the idea that we are never yet redeemed, and actually, it might be important aspect of the Pesach story that we discuss this, that we have work to do. We have a lot of work to do all the time.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think I would also, I messaged this briefly to Rabbi Schatz. In a fortuitous, odd, and wonderful confluence of events, while teaching this class,
about houses.
What?
About houses.
About houses. Sarah and I are officially homeowners as of like 20 minutes ago. So hopefully it won't be leprous.
You.
What?
That's up to you.
Yeah. So it's now that is officially a thing, and I will literally be, as soon as this Zoom ends, driving over to get the keys. So that's wild. It's now that that's at stake, thinking about tearing down a dwelling all of a sudden seems like a much more serious thing. I wouldn't want that to happen. That sounds terrible. So I think, again, this idea of, is there anything that could have been done to prevent it? Like what's really at stake here? And, like Rabbi Schatz just said, is this something that is this a malady that sort of unfolds and you cross your fingers, close your eyes, and hope for the best? Or is this something that the owners of the home or the residents of the home have some agency in trying to prevent? We don't get a lot on that.
Yeah.
And the Mefarshim, the commentators, don't seem to give a lot to us on that either. Our rabbi seemed interested in like the sort of technical specifics of how what's happening. And Rabbi says, I don't know if you saw differently. I was hoping to see more on like, what should the people who live there be doing to prevent it? And I didn't see a lot of that, and that feels kind of unsatisfying to me.
Well, I think that we probably don't see a lot of that because I don't think they knew. Like the rabbis of the Talmud are the ones who discuss it being Lashon Hara. It's not the rabbis not the rabbis. It's not the Torah. So I think it's very possible that they just didn't know how to prevent it, or that they didn't know what it was. And so it ended up being this thing that they would contract, and then I don't know that we hear about dying, but they would contract and then it would somehow spread. This is a very random thing to share, but I was watching a show last night, and
what show, Rabbi Schatz?
Bridgerton, and
really?
What? Yeah, it's like a brainless thing to watch while doing other things. It's not. I don't have to pay that much attention, so it's an easy show to watch while doing work. Like preparing for this class. Just kidding. I didn't do that at the same time. But in one scene, someone gets stung by a bee, and because back in the day they didn't know what anaphylactic shock was, the person dies. And it just makes me think that, like,
spoiler alert.
But I didn't tell you who, and it happens within the first 5 seconds of an episode. It's fine.
Spoiler alert.
Okay. But
now I'm definitely not going to watch it.
Okay. But the way in which we talk about leprosy is kind of the same, right? We call it leprosy today. A, we don't know that Sarah was actually leprosy. And B, we don't know that they knew what to do about leprosy. So that's, I think, to get back to your point, Rabbi Shapiro, of like, why doesn't it say what the people in the house should be doing? I think they didn't know. They lived their lives.
Yeah.
Similar to like when we were all wearing, actually I never did this, but like when we were all wearing gloves and face shields, but no masks because people thought that was, the thing to do. Like, we were trying to figure it out, and now we think we know what we were supposed to do, but we might not even know now what we're supposed to do.
The days of those halcyon days of wiping down groceries.
Correct. Right. Exactly. Anyway. Thoughts from other people other than Rabbi Shapiro and I? Yeah, Time.
It's more good and welfare. Is that okay?
Sure. It's been a full of good and welfare.
So I teach on Fridays once a month at the same time. So I missed last Friday. So I did not get to hear how Renee's cake went over, the birthday cake of 2 weeks ago. I was just reminded because she's cooking or baking again.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Thank you. The cake came out.
Yeah,
lovely.
the cake. You don't remember that delicious looking cake?
The cake came out lovely. We had
She was in the South,
one-year-old
Rabbi Shapiro.
birthday.
It was you and Jackie.
And Rabbi Schatz did a beautiful Sharon ceremony for my grandson. He was so happy with it that he asked me the other day if she's coming back.
Oh, that's very cute. You can tell him, yes, I will definitely come back and play with him.
Yeah, it's very
cute. Yeah, Paula.
So I had a question. The text says you have to call the high priest. Right. So you have to have the observation that there's something amiss.
Right.
And then you go and you get the high priest. So there's some period of time where you can clean the house for company, or arrange things. And I was just thinking about you have to so believe in the system that you will call the high priest, because somebody's going to know, you're going to have to go and do it. So there's this whole thing about the timing and the trust that seems to.
It's interesting It's interesting you bring that up because I wrote one of the the table of 5 in the Jewish Journal. I'm one of the 5 this week. And one of the pieces that I spoke about was actually very similar to that, which was a person had to get themselves to the priest in a different part of this week's Parasha, not having to do with the house, but had to actually get themselves to the priest because no one could get near them. So they had to take it upon themselves to leave their home in basically quarantine to get to the priest, for the priest to tell them that they have something that they wouldn't want to have anyway, to then go back to their home and have to go through this process all over again. And I brought a piece from the Gemara that talks about how we really need other people to help us get out of our own misery and our own pain, that we can't get ourselves out of that. So I think that there's a lot of accountability, and there's a lot of, if you want to say, faith, and there's a lot of communal responsibility also. But on the flip side of that, there's also communal fear of, well, we're not going to get near that person because we don't understand it and we don't want to get it. So it's kind of not chicken or egg, but it's a little bit of a ripple effect where the person needs to take care of themselves so that the community is taken care of, but then the community should really be helping them care for themselves and can't because they're in quarantine. And how do they deal with that?
So,
Rabbi Shapiro, newest homeowner on the block. Anything you want to say?
Sure. I just, we've been talking about what Sara'at might or might not be. Full disclosure, I just stumbled upon this, but I think it's interesting to see in terms of thinking about not just what it might be in terms of infectious disease, but how we might conceptualize what generates this. Mm-hmm. So this is out of Midrash Tanchuma, a collection of Midrashim. So this is a rabbinic text, but it talks about what might generate Sara'at, what might cause this in a way that's not just about epidemiology. Mm-hmm. So it could come from 11 things: idolatry, desecrating God's name, unchastity, which is a very nice way of saying doing naughty things, theft, slander. So slander so it's one of them, right, but not the only one. False witness upon a judge who perverts justice, swearing in vain. And this is interesting, entering a domain which is not his. I think that's more in a ritual context, but it's still interesting. And here's a tough one: one who thinks false thoughts. We're all in big trouble. And one who instigates quarrels among brothers, and also for the evil eye. So I think by this list, we all have.
You've done that to me.
We all will have Sara'at pretty soon. Yes, hello.
Right.
Yes, hello. Rabbi Rebecca Schatz's phone. How may a director call? Can I answer, please?
No.
No?
I hung up on them.
All right. but I think it's just interesting to see. I mean, that's a pretty expansive list, which, you know, we talk a lot in this class about how you don't legislate out of nothing, right? You don't have a rule unless there's a reason for the rule to be there, right? The speed limit on the highway, speed limit wouldn't be 55 unless people wanted to drive 80, right? And so on the one hand, Sara'at seems to be something that, like, well, that's so weird. Who would ever have that? That can't be a thing. Maybe, with that rabbinic understanding, Sara'at, whether real or perceived or whatever it might be, actually kind of showed up. And we're trying to make sense of this and how we would need to navigate it. Now, then that text about there never was a leprous house, maybe it's a sense that there was never a house that was so infected that it had to be torn down, is I think what that's saying. But the way in which these transgressions show up might have consequences. And Paula put a wise comment in the chat that it's both personal and public, right? Although I would also say a lot of this stuff are probably only things that you would really know about. Right. Only you know some of these things. And so then it's a question of, okay, well, if you've done these things, and I would maybe even invert that a little bit, Paula. A lot of these things are things that are within oneself that then emanate outwards, right? Something that I'm doing that reverberates out into the community.
That impact the community.
Exactly. So then it's interesting to think about Sara'at on me and then Sara'at in my house and then how to prevent that from further spread, right? So maybe it's interesting as well to think about this idea that the actions I take impact me, and if I keep doing them, they're going to impact my house. And hopefully, maybe that's what the Rabbi is saying, that's where it stops. But we're going to notice it at some point, which again then sort of gets to like my lingering question on this, which is like, what's the experience of the person living in the Tzara'at house, and how do they address whatever they need to address so that it doesn't permeate it too much? So maybe it's sort of like a weirdly optimistic drash that like it can get bad, but not too bad, right? We always manage to stave it off in time that we don't need to destroy the whole house. But it's an interesting list. It's an interesting list to look at. Yeah, Mike.
You know, I'm just remembering what you said last night, Rabbi, you know, about whatever you have in your mind at the Haggadah Slam. Yeah. Whatever you have in your mind could be idolatrous, you know, depending on what you're thinking about.
Right.
And also what you said at the end, where you related first of all, Rabbi, in some of the source sheets, Rabbi Schatz and Jackie talked about the broken matzah as a reminder of our human limitations, and then you sort of brought it home at the end with the bow about the children, you know, bringing that we're sort of eating our dinner in the wilderness, and then it's the kids. Who do we trust to bring their half? And I don't know. You could even read it again, or it was so. It just got me thinking. It's such a powerful way to look at the Seder, you know, and how we do this.
Yeah. Well, that was a great bow. That was something I said, Rabbi Shapiro. Mike was quoting me, not you, so you don't have to remember.
Yeah.
Why would anyone quote anyone else?
No, I just didn't want you to think that you didn't remember something you.
I was like, I don't think
I said that.
Oh.
Well, I mean, let me quote Rabbi Shapiro.
No,
okay.
No, you don't have to do that. Oh, no, you don't have to quote me. Tybal has something to say.
Oh, yeah, Tybal.
So I was in some other class, I don't even remember where, and I started saying, well, if you're going to put a bow on it.
There you go.
And then I remembered that was the wrong, you know, not a cultural illusion that would be understood anywhere outside of Rabbi Shapiro.
Yes. This is it's a figure of speech that people use. This isn't just a me thing, right?
Correct.
Yeah. I look the best in it, but.
Correct. All right, so I'm very happy to be done with these parshiot, but also very glad that we got to go through them. Sometimes they're together, right? Sometimes Tazria and Metzora are together, and I think that it's really nice to be able to separate them out and see the differences in the two parshiot, even if it keeps us in the topic a little bit longer. But I hope that you're able to really think about this in a metaphor for your lives. Like what is the tzara'at, that is taking over your homes, taking over your life, that you are trying to get rid of, and who are those people that are helping you figure that out? Because I think that ultimately, like if we took it out of the context of the Parsha, that ultimately is what we're trying to understand as a lesson, which is we can, based on behavior, we can contract things that affect us and affect those around us, and that we need the people around us to be able to help us figure it out.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.